So, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Lloyd, for coming again. I think this is episode number 6 already, and I appreciate and very thankful for your incredible work and knowledge and time and patience. And I'm giving the floor back to you as usual.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I much appreciate the opportunity to speak on the topic of Islam. Um, for those who don't know, my name is Lloyd de Jongh. I'm South African. I live in Poland, and yeah, last week we didn't have a show because I was traveling. I was away, and yeah, so forgive me if today I'm a little bit tired. I just got back from my trip, so I'm I got back late last night, and I have a lot of catching up to do, and it was a busy time. So yeah, at the moment we are discussing, obviously we're discussing Islam, and we've had a heavy focus on Islamic law because Islam is a religion of law. And if it is a religion of law, what are its laws? This is something that we do need to establish. And of course, once we ask what are its laws, we also have to ask ourselves where are its laws found. So of course, we've been going through some of the major Sharia manuals. I've been showing the most popular manual of Islamic law. And Muslims are to a large degree required, or to some degree required, to be aware of and to know their laws. So while they may not be familiar with all the specific ins and outs, because that would be the domain of the scholars, they are required to have a broad overview and they do have a general understanding of this. And Sharia law is, as we've been showing, completely antithetical to Western norms, Western concepts, to Western law, and of course, it is what we would consider completely immoral. It is something that would violate the typical Western concept of the Ten Commandments, or just norms of decency. So, any questions before we begin? Because I will be discussing, I'll be picking up from the presentation where I left off. We're discussing Islam with its connection to Gnosticism, because Islam does claim within the Islamic law to be explicitly a Gnostic religion, to be derived from and based on Gnostic beliefs, and its scholars claim to be Gnostics. So, any questions before we begin?
Any questions, guys? No, please go ahead.
Okay, so I would need to share my screen now. So, sharing screen two, and here we go. Okay, so now I have my second screen shared. Okay, everyone. Right. So we ended off by discussing some of the previous Gnostic sects, right? And looking at what they believed and their overlap with Islam. So we've been discussing besides the explicit admissions that Islam is Gnostic by its major scholars. You can look on YouTube, you'll find plenty of videos to that effect, even within the Islamic law, the Sharia and the fiqh, right? So that's the Islamic sacred law. That is the ultimate source of Islam, which is derived from the Quran and the Sunnah and everything. And Islam produced the ultimate work of Islam is the Sharia. The Sharia is the equivalent, you would say, basically a clone of the Jewish Talmud. However, it inverts the Talmud. It is in some ways, in some cases, a parody of the Talmud. Now, um, okay, so we ended off on Ebionism. We discussed the Ebionites. That was the last slide we did. So now I'll continue from Plotinus. And Plotinus had a concept of God called the One. Now, Plotinus was, as we see, he was a pagan Hellenistic philosopher from Alexandria. Now, it's very interesting when you look at so many of these mystical religions, all of these mystery religions, these occult groups, these Gnostic groups, they all seem to, so many of them are somehow tied to Alexandria. The name comes up fairly often. Now, to my knowledge, he despised Christianity, and he was the founder of Neoplatonism. Now, let's continue with the fun things that he had to say. So, now his writings were very widely read within Augustine of Hippo's time, right? So that would be the 5th century. And this is over 200 years before Muhammad's first revelation. Now, Augustine responded to the writings of Plotinus, and he, by countering many of his thoughts and ideas in writing in a book called The City of God, or On the City of God Against the Pagans, De Civitate Dei contra Paganos, right? So his ideas, the ideas of Plotinus were obviously highly influential because the church during its formative years found huge amounts of resistance because the Gnosticism was reaction to the thinking of the church. What should be noted though is when you start looking at the Bible, look at the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, of course, from within a Jewish perspective, there's only the Old Testament, and so that in fact there's just that's the Bible, and of course, but let's just use the common terms Old Testament, New Testament. You know what I mean? These are used extensively by archaeologists, either to find things or to identify things that have been found. Whereas if you look at the Gnostic writings, these are myths. These are entirely myth, as is Islam, which is based on myth, because it has no value, it has no archaeological value, right? So this is something that should be borne in mind. There is zero archaeological value to the things, to the writings of the Gnostics. Now, so let's look at briefly at a high level comparison. We're going to cover aspects of the Christian God, Yahweh, and versus Plotinus, the One, and Allah. Um, so here we've got the Christian God, you've got Plotinus, the One, and you have the Islamic Allah, right? Now, if you look at the sovereignty, so of course, in all three of these religions, let me just actually get my bring up my mouse pointer. In all three cases, of course, you're dealing with a creator, right? In terms of his nature, God is a simple being with a complex nature, a single being, sorry, a single being. So the triune God. So it's obviously you've got a Trinity that is one. Now that is of course part of the sort of the mystery of one of the mysteries of the Christian faith. If you look at the one, you have a simple unity, but he's beyond being, right? This is very much the same as what is in Islam. You have a simple unity with pure will. So he's beyond being. Now, if you combine these concepts of the one and Allah, you will see that these are exactly the attributes of Allah. Now, simple unity beyond being. Allah is indescribable. He has no bearing, no relationship to humans in terms of his structure, design. If you look at from a Christian point of view, a Western world point of view, worldview, you've got that God made man in his own image. So we are made in the image of God. Whereas in Islam, God bears no resemblance to us. He's beyond anything we can describe. He's beyond knowing. So thus, he's, again, there's this beyond description, beyond being. But interesting, what is here is will. When you look at the concept of will, you look at Anton LaVey, look at the Thelema and those things. If you look at the satanic, some of the well-known satanic proponents of history, they'll say things like, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right? Will, because Allah is will, God is logos. These are two very different concepts. Now, what few people realize is that the God of Islam, Allah, is will. And therefore, because he is will, he's able to do anything. Now, we know, for instance, that God cannot lie because he's a God of truth. He's a God of logos. Whereas in Islam, Allah can lie, right? Allah can break promises. Allah can deceive. Because he's capable of anything, to deny that he's capable of something is to deny his ultimate power, is to deny him the ability to do anything. And therefore, Allah must be able to lie, deceive, manipulate, and so on. This makes him totally antithetical, again, to the Christian concept of God. That's from a philosophical point of view, but this is from the Islamic understanding. Allah is able to do all of these things. Therefore, he cannot be the Christian God. Okay, so actions. God, intrinsic. Okay, the one, I'm not exactly sure what they mean by the intrinsic, extrinsic. So forgive me there. Can it be known? Yes. So the Christian God can be known through reason and faith. In other words, if God is a logical nature, a rational nature, gave us a rational mind, and if the world is created out of logic, if there's a reason for its being and there's a structure to how it's ordered, therefore man's mind is capable of knowing it. So therefore man's mind is able to, through reason, to decipher how the world is structured. Whereas here, notice in the one is unknowable only through complete submission. Islam means submission. Islam means to submit to Allah, to submit completely. So you can only know by helpless submission, whereas here you have to actively utilize your reason to determine what is real, to determine what is factual, what is true. So notice that, and here Allah is inscrutable, is unknowable, right? So here you've got a completely different view of how to view the world. In this case, it's like Islam, you'll be told by those who know more than you, those who have the gnosis. Whereas this is different from this side, you've got the logos. Any comment from you, Harry, before I go further?
No, I'm listening. It's extremely important. Interesting. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So man's nature. What is man's nature under the Christian worldview? Well, you are free. You are free to decide. Yes, you are free to sin. This is, of course, not something that God would want you to do, but you are free to make your own decisions. You have free will. This is very much a Western concept. It's also where you get the concept of the individualist. You get the lolbitarians. I hesitate to call them libertarians because their ideas don't really extend into how do large scale government. Obviously, libertarianism can work on a small scale, but in terms of large scale, we need to organize large things. No, not so well. But libertarians have become lolbitarians. So, whereas in the one, you're a slave, and under Allah, man is a slave. Okay, man is a slave of Allah, and you're a slave of the one. Basis for obedience: love. You love God, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Whereas the one is approached through mysticism. Mysticism is separate from submission and obedience, which is part of your slavery, right? Now, the mystic aspect, as we discussed previously, of Islam, this is something reserved purely for the scholars of Islam. That's in the two higher levels. Of the four levels, those in the two highest levels, those are the ones who practice Islamic mysticism. They fulfill the mystic rites within Islam. The rest of the Muslims simply have to obey as slaves by submission. Allah, fear, because Allah threatens those who don't listen. In fact, let me find that word actually. Let me go here to within the Sharia. Oops. Let me actually find you this where we'll see. So notice here, it says here very distinctly within the Sharia, Allah threatens those who oppose the messenger and follow other than the believers' way, the believers being the Muslims. So Allah threatens people. Okay, Allah threatens people with punishment and with death. So those are very, very different concepts of how we deal with the relationship to the Creator. So there's the parallel between this Platonism. Well, Plotinus is the one, and Islam. Man's will, free will. Okay, the one imposing one's will on another, right? And predestination. Now we know within Islam there's predestination. However, this bit here about imposing one's will on another. Again, we've discussed previously the word deen. I'm going to bring this up, right? Imposing your will on another. Now the idea is to show how Islam has borrowed these concepts and actually incorporated them into itself, right? So I'm going to go here again. This I've shown before, but Islam is not a religion. Islam is a deen. And what is the meaning? So here's this abstract on this, okay? And deen, its meaning and scope. Remember, we've covered this before. This is from the major Islamic dictionary called the Lisan al-Arab, the tongue of the Arabs. And it's 20 volumes, okay? There are four meanings of the term deen. Let's look at the first two again. The first meaning is subjugation or dominance, administrative or legislative authority to put pressure to be obedient, using power to enslave. Let me make that bold. Using power to enslave or to make one obedient. Okay, it says here, I subjugated them so they obeyed me. Understand, this is the meaning of the word deen because Islam is a deen, not a religion. The second meaning, obedience and bondage, subordination, domination by someone, and bearing humiliation under subjugation and power of others. So deen does not mean religion, but it means obedience. This is from an Islamic scholar giving us this interesting insight into the subject. So hopefully you see here that they've borrowed this and they've structured the entire religion around these borrowed Gnostic and pagan ideas. Man's purpose is to know the Creator. In the one, you want to submit and you want to obey, as we just showed. You submit to and you obey. As the Quran says, we hear and we obey. Is there a day of resurrection under Christianity? Yes. Under Plotinus' concept of the one, he doesn't mention it. And in Islam, yes. Of course, within Islam, Jesus will come back, Muhammad will come back. Jesus will fight at the side of Muhammad. He will kill the Jews, kill the Christians, destroy the church, etc. And so hopefully you see then that Islam bears a lot in common with pagan ideas. The concept of Allah is borrowed from pagan ideas that came 200 years prior to the rise of Islam. Any commentary before I go on?
Let's see if we have some questions. Questions, please. Raise your hand if you have a question, please. No, go ahead, please.
Okay, right. So hopefully that's clear. Now, I want to mention, oddly enough, Plotinus arises, if we go to the Encyclopedia of Islam and we look up the term madhab. Madhab is a school of jurisprudence. Those are the four major schools of Islamic jurisprudence that we're so familiar with, that we hear about. The four schools that a Muslim must belong to. You've got the Shafi, the Hanbali, the Maliki, and the Hanbali, and so on. Okay, so you got Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali. So a way of thinking. Now notice the madhab, the school of jurisprudence, as we call it, is a way of thinking, or a form of indoctrination, if you will. It is a school of persuasion. We discussed the ilm I forgot the term, but we discussed it previously, where we showed about the persuasion as well, how Islam uses debate as a form of persuasion. They utilize rhetoric to deceive. So this also happens to be a form of persuasion, a school of persuasion. Now, they speak of the five schools of law in Islam, the Hanafi and so on, and of course the Jafari, which is the Shia school. So these are the four schools that are recognized within Sunni Islam, and this is the fifth, which is recognized. So the Sunnis actually do recognize the Jafari school of law in Shia Islam. Now, oddly enough, they mention here the Madhab al-Hadarat, the name for the Plotinian scheme of dynamic emanation. So oddly enough, within Islam, they actually recognize Plotinus, which is very, very interesting. The scheme of dynamic emanation. Now, of course, within Gnosticism, you have the monad. The monad is this ultimate unity, and the monad emanates beings. It emanates. It constantly emanates. And these ideas, obviously, we've discussed previously, are very Gnostic, but also they're very Islamic. The constant concept of emanation. So they actually have borrowed. So it shows here within their own terminology, within their own legal terminology, they've borrowed from the Plotinian scheme. And of course, if we look at Hadra, which we see al-Hadarat, presence. It's used broadly by mystics as a synonym of hudud, being in the presence of Allah. And it's correlated with ghaiba, with references they're given, absence from all except Allah. So with the absence of everything else, all you have is the presence of Allah. So here they're referring to, well, you connect the dots. You tell me what you think of that. But understand, they're utilizing this Plotinian, they've stolen this idea, which came 200 years before Muhammad, which was widely spread, and they've now created Allah, and they've borrowed these ideas. And this is where Allah, one of the factors where Allah comes from, where he stems from. So he's not a unique being, right? He's simply something. It's like he's a concoction made out of multiple different, as we've seen, multiple different schools of thought from various mystical schools of thought and Gnosticism. Okay, so now ghaib, let's have a look at this concept of ghaib. Ghaib means absence, what is hidden, what is inaccessible to the senses and to reason. That would be the mystic knowledge of the gnosis, right? This would be what the Gnostics seek, knowledge that is beyond reason. And it stands for mystery, because these are mystery schools. Islam is a mystery religion. It may not be known as such, it might not advertise itself as such. However, it is just Gnosticism repackaged with a few of its own unique twists. So in mysticism, okay, Rai means, according to context, the reality of the world beyond reason, which gnosis experiences. So the world beyond reason, we've spoken before, we've shown some different things as we went along, that they speak of a pre-rational and post-rational reality. And the whole point is to disconnect from normal reality, disconnect from reason, disconnect from the logos, so that you can and go through various mystical procedures, go through various incantations and rituals, so that you can exit your rational mind and enter into the mystical world, pierce the 99 veils, enter into the throne room of Allah, and have communion with Allah in that way. So, and then of course, ghaiba, occultation, in mysticism, used for the condition of anyone who has been withdrawn by Allah from the eyes of men, blah, blah, blah. But understand that within Islam, there's a huge amount of mystical discussion that is completely ignored. When we talk about Islam, everyone goes, well, the 5 pillars of Islam. How about the 6 pillars of the Sharia? We need to look into that maybe, right? The Quran says the Quran's nearly irrelevant. We need to look at the Sharia. I said, if Islam's a religion of law, what are its laws and where can its laws be found? And when you read through the documentation, the best documentation available on Islam, even from its own sources, there's a huge amount of discussion of ritual and magic and mysticism and occultism, huge stores of it. Everywhere you look, this is not discussed, this is protected, this is defended, and this needs to be examined and studied because Islam is an occult religion. Let's have a look here. So let's look at Jeffrey, one of the foremost, what Muslims would call the Orientalists. Islam, Muhammad, and his religion. And they speak here, the old Arabian paganism was at that time in a process of disintegration, but Judaism and Christianity were widely represented in the Arabian Peninsula, and to a lesser extent, Zoroastrianism and certain Gnostic sects. Now, we've covered various other sources which specifically speak of the Gnosticism. So here's another source as well from a very, very well-known scholar of the era. So several preachers of monotheism. Okay. Now, notice he says here, it was Muhammad who had succeeded in syncretizing certain basic elements of Judeo-Christian faith and practice with native Arabian beliefs, right? So as you've seen, Islam has borrowed from the Talmud, borrowed from Jewish stories, borrowed from Christianity, borrowed from Zoroastrianism, borrowed from wherever, as well as from the Gnostics. Now, interestingly, again, this from the Encyclopedia of Islam, it says that Dul-Nun was the first to teach the true nature of gnosis, or the marifa, which he describes as knowledge of the attributes of the unity. So the unity being Allah. Now, if we go back to the one, they speak of a simple unity. Again, some of these words and concepts you can see are being borrowed from paganism and being borrowed from Gnosticism. And this belongs to the saints. Now, the saints in Islam are all Sufis. The saints in Islam are the Sufis, the Sufi saints. Muslims will automatically have a knee-jerk reaction and deny that the Sufis are Muslims, which is fascinating, but not true. So those who contemplate the face of Allah within their heart so that God reveals himself in a way which he has not revealed to any others in the world, the Gnostics. Okay? And again, yes?
Lloyd, I have a small question. Why did it evolve in Arabia? Why not in Egypt or other countries which had stronger bonds to the Gnostic religions?
Yeah,
What
Alexandria
happened
seems to
during
have
that?
been a source, but the Gnostics were very unpopular, so the Roman Empire kicked them out. And they all ended up in Arabia, which was like a no man's land. So the
I
Gnostics all
understand.
ended up in that part of the world where they were able to practice without harassment, I guess. And that's where those ideas all migrated to that part of the world.
Thank you.
So let's have a look at this concept called kashif. You'll see Muslims with names kashif, and it says here in mysticism. Again, when you go through the sources on Islam, there's constant reference to mysticism, occultism, magic, ritual. In mysticism, the act of lifting and tearing away the veil. And again, this is Madame Blavatsky language, tearing away the veil, right? Which comes between man and the extra phenomenal world, the kashif. So there's constant reference everywhere within Islam to Gnosticism, Gnostic ritual, magic, magical ritual, and so on. And if you look at the Kashif al-Mahjub, which is the oldest Persian treatise on Sufism, you're going to find copious, I think there's at least 128 references to Gnosticism in the book, explicit uses of the word Gnostic or Gnosticism within this, right? Now, let's have another reference. This Muhammad bin Fadl al-Balkhi says this knowledge is of 3 kinds: from Allah, with Allah, and of Allah. So knowledge of Allah is the science of gnosis, the ilmi marifat. So Gnosticism is a science in Islam. I don't know if we went into any depth in this, but the sciences in Islam really do not. There's the ilm al-amal, which is the science of the practical, right? Practical matters like accountancy and so on. But the major sciences in Islam are all about religious knowledge, which is primary, comes before everything else. Everything else is secondary, right? So the sacred knowledge, again, the gnosis, the knowledge of Allah is the science of gnosis. Don't forget, in Islam, rhetoric is a science. Okay, rhetoric within Islam is a science to utilize rhetoric for the purposes of deception. I believe we did discuss this last week. We went through that, and whereby Allah is known to all his prophets and saints. Now, the prophets are in the Bible, and the saints, again, are the Sufis. Understand that, the Sufi saints. It cannot be acquired by ordinary means. In other words, your regular mind can't do it. You're too dumb. You're one of the plebs. Only the elite, the elect, the illuminated ones, let's say the illuminated ones, those are the ones within Islam that can understand this knowledge. It is the result of divine guidance and information. Aha, secret knowledge given by Allah. Interesting. Very much a Gnostic concept. Jesus gave secret knowledge. It wasn't recorded in the book. Jesus said a few things, right? I got secret knowledge, secret guidance, secret divine information, not regular stuff. Knowledge from Allah is the science of the sacred law. Interesting. Knowledge from Allah is the science of the sacred law. Ilmi Shariat, which is very interesting because last week I was going through the Sharia, and well, the previous week, and someone lost their cool. This young woman was very, very unhappy with me discussing the Sharia. So understand, if we want to know about these things, at least one layer of it, we need to be reading the Sharia, which he has commanded and made obligatory upon us. So the Sharia is commanded upon and made obligatory to Muslims. Right. Now, interestingly here, okay, let's look at some other references to Gnosticism within Islam. Let me see if I have any notes attached to this that I should reference just in case. Yes. No notes. Okay. So, the uncovering of the first veil is the gnosis of Allah. So, if you want to know Allah, you must uncover the first veil. This is the gnosis of Allah, the marifat Allah. Then, right? And then the hearts of the Gnostics. They speak of the Gnostics. Again, constant reference to the Gnostics wherever you look in Islam. And then the science of the stations and the science of the path. These are rituals, magical rituals, which they deem a science, right? Gnosis is unsound without acceptance of the law. So now everyone, Muslims, will constantly complain that the Sufis are not real Muslims. They're not real Muslims. Yeah, there's no real Muslims as far as I can tell. But they will constantly say the Sufis are not real Muslims. When you read the Islamic law, the Sharia, with reference to the Sufis, a true Sufi is someone who is completely obedient to the Sharia. So remember, I've mentioned in the past there are two sides to Islam. You have the Sharia and you have the Haqiqah. The Sharia, is following the law, simply obeying the law like a good Muslim. That's the basic level of obedience, the basic form of worship, the basic understanding of Islam. You will just simply follow the law, be a good boy, shut your mouth, don't say anything. On the second level, the second division is the knowledge of Allah. This is where the Sufis, they have the knowledge of Allah, the character, the personality of Allah. This is not something that's not present within the Quran. This is something derived by them. So this is the knowledge that is purely that of the scholars. And notice they need to know the law. So to have the knowledge of the personality of Allah, you also have to know the knowledge of the law of Allah. So they must be fully compliant. So therefore, they are a higher level of scholar than your average imam, average sheikh. The Sufis are the elite within Islam. Okay, so, and of course, again, they say the Gnostic, the Gnostic, the Gnostic. So they are constantly referencing Gnostics. And they say here what he knows in a Gnostic who speaks in relativity state, and blah blah gnosis. Gnosis is not gnosis unless it has reality. When they say reality, they are referring to the Muhammadan reality, not the reality of logic, of reason, of logos. Right? This is a very different sort of rationality that they're referring to. And again, you see here references to Gnostics and Gnostics and Gnosis, Gnosis and Gnosis. It's constant references to Gnosis. Islam is Gnosticism. Right, I'll pause there. Any comment before I go on?
Questions, guys? Please raise your hand. No, we're listening. Please continue.
Okay, so those are all references from major Islamic sources, right? And I've been showing them as we've been going through the series. So there's again additional evidence that Islam is just Gnosticism. Everything is Gnosticism, secret knowledge, sacred knowledge. And therefore, you don't know these things because this is the secret knowledge for the elite within Islam, right? Now, the Demiurge, now similarities with Allah, slide number 4 on this subject. So the Demiurge is regarded by many Gnostic sects as the Christian God, the Jewish God, Yahweh, right? He is an evil god, a lesser god who is spiritually below the level of humans, right? And he was a malicious trickster and he created the world, right? So some of the Gnostic sects identify him as this evil god, this demiurge with Yahweh. So he was one of the eons and he created the physical world. And the demiurge is malevolent, he's evil, he's a false god. Now, within Islam, there's a concept called the Deen al Batil, right? Because Islam sees itself as the Deen al Haq, the religion of truth, right? The Haq is more than just truth; it's the religion of the ultimate reality, the ultimate substance of reality. It is the ultimate truth that underlies, pardon me, reality, and the substrate that underlies the reality is Muhammad. Okay, is the Nuri Muhammadi, the light of Muhammad, but also the Ruh Muhammadi, the spirit of Muhammad. So what would be termed the Holy Ghost within Christianity and is basically Muhammad within Islam, right? So a heavenly being, he's subordinate to the supreme being, and he's considered to be the controller of the evil physical material world and antagonistic to all that is purely spiritual. And the demiurge seeks to keep us locked in the material, locked in the flesh, right? Because our souls, our thoughts, our being is what is true, and the flesh is a prison, which is why you can put on a wig and pretend to be a woman and identify as because your body is just an evil prison that should be ignored because the real you is the soul inside you that is five spirit LGBTQPEDO. Understand? So this is where a lot of this thinking comes from, as we covered early on. Now, the Jesus of the physical realm would be evil according to this particular paradigm, right? And this is exactly what Islam says, because Islam has Isa. He's not the Christian Jesus. These are two very contradictory thoughts. Now, what you can learn, you can read up on the Deen al Batil, which is by Tafsir Qurtubi. See archive.org for a copy of that. Yes, there was a comment.
I just wanted to ask if there is a connection between the Demiurge and Jehovah in the Bible, because I think I remember from the Theosophical organization that they consider Jehovah as a evil god who puts
Mhm.
the Adam and Eve against their will in absolute ignorance in heaven, and basically the snake is the one to release them from this
Yeah, that's
situation.
Gnosticism. It inverts everything. Gnosticism inverts the concept, the creation story. So yeah, so God becomes evil, and God denies them knowledge, the sacred knowledge, and they have the
So,
sacred knowledge. Yeah.
so Jehovah is the Demiurge according to them.
According to Islam, God, the Christian God, the Jewish God, is the evil demiurge. Yes. According to not every single school, but some of them reference him, Jehovah, as the evil demiurge. Yeah.
Do you have any reference for that you can maybe provide in the future?
I'd have to look into that specifically, but yeah, I mean, it's common knowledge. It is common knowledge, but as to which specific schools, which mystery schools specifically name Jehovah or allude to Jehovah as being, but basically, this is why you'll find that these schools are all antagonistic to Christianity. All of them stand in opposition to Christianity. Right? This is why there's such massive opposition because they're taught within the paradigm, whether they are aware of the historical basis for it or not, that Christianity is evil and that they have the secret knowledge and that they need to stand against Christianity. Therefore, they invert morality.
What is the position of a regular Shia or Sunni Muslim member about all these mystical Sufis? How do they see them, and what is the importance of mysticism for the regular Muslims?
Okay, so if you speak to, like, say, Nigerians, they'll speak of a thing called the Jute, okay, which is their form of magic, what their folk name for their magic that is common. You go to East Africa as well, you'll see that the Africans will talk about it's very common magic, the concept of magic, the use of magic, witchcraft, black magic is very very common within those cultures. Even in the Middle East, the concept is very very common. Morocco, Algeria, those concepts are there. Now, in practice, or rather in theory, Muslims are supposed to be completely against it because it's evil. But when you read through these sources, you'll find that the utilization of magic for various things is very much ingrained in the culture. Okay, it's a very, very common thing within the culture. And again, no one is. I'm starting now to dive into this and try to piece this together. Right, no one else has really done it, and I'm starting to collect it together to try to understand. But it's not a very well known topic, and it's odd because it's so deeply ingrained into Islam. Now, regular Muslims will deny that the Sufis are the elite, the cream, the ultimate masters of Islam. right? But they are. For instance, as a practical example, they will deny that the Sufis are real Muslims. They'll deny that the Sufis are worshipping and doing Islam correctly. But if you look at Al Azhar University, which is the major seminary within Islam, it's the most important, the oldest, the most prestigious Islamic seminary in the world, which produces their best scholars, their best imams who get sent around the world, right? It's where Barack Obama went to do his bowing and scraping when he became US president, I think in 2008, I think it was. He went, his first external visit was to the Islamic world, and he went to Al Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, to go do his bowing and scraping because that's basically the seat of Islamic knowledge and wisdom and has been for 1,000 years. The rector of Al Azhar University is a Sufi. The previous rector before this guy was also a Sufi. And Al Azhar doesn't just have the four major schools of fiqh, right? The four schools of jurisprudence that Muslims follow, right? They also have the seven schools of Sufism. They teach that there too. They also produce Sufis. Now, it's very interesting that the world's greatest Islamic university doesn't seem to know that Sufism is bad, but all these Muslims do. Now, either the Muslims are ignorant or it's a big con game and they're utilizing this to shall we say, muddy the waters and to hide attention, distract away from the fact that we really need to be looking at what are the Sufis teaching, what is the mystical and occult within Islam, because this is being avoided. Does that answer your question?
Does. Thank you.
Okay, now let's look at the concept of Deen al Batil. Okay, let's look at Tafsir Qurtubi. Tafsir is an interpretation. That's one of the literal names or what it means, literally, interpretation. These are the commentaries on the Quran. So these are verse by verse, chapter by chapter commentaries by major scholars. And Qurtubi writes this in his Tafsir. Do not mix up truth with falsehood and knowingly hide the truth. Now, Christians and Jews are accused of hiding the truth, right? The secret knowledge, the sacred knowledge, we hide it, okay? And Islam reveals it, right? We hide the sacred knowledge. So we've edited the Bible, we've falsified the Bible, etc., etc. And it says here, a thing is mixed up when it is mixed with something similar to it, then it is not clear. Qatada said that the meaning of the phrase, do not mix up Judaism and Christianity with Islam. So do not mix up truth with falsehood. The correct phrase is do not mix up Judaism and Christianity with Islam. Now it's interesting that the major scholars of Islam will tell us that we're not the same religion. When your average Muslim will say, but we worship the same God, which is obviously not true. So the word used for falsehood is batil, which means when something becomes unsound and worthless. So in other words, Christianity is worthless. Judaism is worthless. It is falsehood. They are unsound. They are vain. From a practical point of view, what they say is that your prayers fall at your feet like dust. Allah doesn't even hear them. God pays no attention to you because you are worshipping a false religion. You should be worshipping behind Muhammad. And it can also mean in vain, right? So you're praying in vain, you're worshipping in vain. The false, Al Batil, is one of the names of Satan. So Judaism and Christianity, according to Islam, is Deen al Batil, which is the religion of Satan. Any comment before I go on?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so let's continue. So now you've got this emanation that comes from this demiurge, that comes from the monad, right? This Gnostic monad, this one, this unity of whatever, this creator God in, and divine elements fall into the material realm, right? And they're locked within humans, and they want to return to the spiritual realm, right? They want to return to the spiritual realm, and so therefore, remember we've said before that within Gnosticism, matter is seen as evil, matter is cursed, and in fact, the very same concept holds within Islam, right? The very same holds within Islam. If you look at the Islamic law, you look at the Sharia, under the under the section where they speak of the sacred knowledge, okay, in the chapter on sacred knowledge, the secret knowledge, the gnosis, they say that the world and what is in it are accursed, except for remembering Allah, which is the worship of Allah, right? Which is basically the narrative, worshiping the narrative, believing the narrative, and someone with sacred knowledge or someone learning it. So basically, The gnosis, the sacred knowledge, is the only thing that saves you being woke to the sacred knowledge, whereas the world itself is evil and the world can be hated. Okay. So now the divine element returns to the spiritual realm when gnosis, special secret knowledge of the divine, is obtained. So you become woke when you get special secret knowledge of what is right and true. And salvation is based on obtaining the secret knowledge. And if you don't know it, you're a racist and a bigot and an Islamophobe. Okay? So salvation is knowledge based. Now, it's not necessarily rational knowledge based, it's a belief because when they tell you men can do women, for instance, which is a derivative of this is not a rational belief supported by the science, right? This is an irrational belief supported just on assertion, right? So it's a denial of reality, but it's the secret knowledge. It shows that you belong to the club. You're willing to go along with this belief. It's not rational knowledge. It is this secret knowledge, this belief, this pre-rational or post-rational, this irrational knowledge, in other words. So it's the belief in myth over reality, denial of logos. It's a complete rejection of logos. Because remember, I showed you before that within Islam, reason is not what your mind determines to be right or wrong or correct. Reason is what you are told by the sacred Islamic law. That is what you are told. The narrative is what is reason. And these ideas have embedded themselves into Western culture as well. And they've created this psychosis, I would call it, of wokeness within Western culture. For instance, now we spoke of sciences, right? Believe the science, right? You hear this all the time. Believe the science. Well, in Islam, science is not to be questioned. That's why in the West these days, science is not to be questioned. But science is a process. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists say things. And science that cannot be questioned is propaganda. But let's look at Islam. You cannot question the science. Let's look at the science. Knowledge of the heart, that's a science. Communally obligatory knowledge, right? Everyone has to know. The religious sciences, right? So what is a religious science? Is religion considered a science? I thought in the West we have a separation between church and state, and that you've got matters of faith and belief, and you've got matters of science, right? But Islam has religious sciences. They've got numerous sciences. Recommended knowledge, subjects that are not sacred knowledge, unlawful knowledge, offensive knowledge, permissible knowledge. This is all part of the gnosis. These are all parts of Islam's concept of knowledge. And they say here that sacred knowledge is superior to devotion. In other words, you've got the five pillars of Islam, like the daily prayer, for instance, right? But sacred knowledge trumps that. Knowledge of the gnosis within Islam is more important and superior to the five daily prayers, which means that the knowledge of the scholars is superior to that of the lay Muslim. Now, Nawawi, one of the most famous scholars within Islam, Sheikh al-Islam, he says, are those who know and those who do not know equal? Because that's, well, in the Quran, okay, 39:9 says, are those who know, and of course that is, those who know, those who have the gnosis, are superior to those who do not know. And who has the gnosis with Islam? Well, the scholars, right? Allah raises those of you who believe and those of you who have been given knowledge whole degrees. Okay, so those are the scholars are whole degrees above the lay Muslim. As we showed before, those scholars are as high above the lay Muslim because of their knowledge as Muhammad was above the lay Muslim. So whoever Allah wishes well, he gives knowledge of religion. The lay Muslim is not allowed what is called this scholastic knowledge. The lay Muslim is denied this level of scholastic knowledge, the theological knowledge, right? Knowledge of the nature of Allah, because this would cause doubt. This would bring them doubt. If they were to learn this, it would cause them doubt. And doubt must be avoided. Doubt is fitna, it's temptation, it's corruption. It would lead them away from Islam. And fitna is worse than murder, right? Last time we had this woman who mentioned Quran 32 and Quran 33. I went through that in detail, where they speak of fitna being worse than murder. I went through that, which is actually taken from the Talmud Sanhedrin, right? I covered that in depth in the last episode towards the end. So the superiority of the learned Muslim, this would be the scholar, over the devotee, that's your lay Muslim, is as my superiority, that's Muhammad's superiority, over the least of you. So the learned Muslim who knows the Sharia and who knows the secret knowledge is as superior to the lay Muslim as Muhammad was over the lay Muslim. And it says here, again, more references to knowledge, 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 sacred knowledge, constantly throughout all of the Islamic texts. That's the code that they use. That's the common language they use to describe the fact that this is a mystery cult. It's a mystery religion. The superiority of the learned Muslim over devotee is like the superiority of the moon over all the stars. And by the way, the stars are beings with souls in Islam. They're actual people. The learned are the beings or creatures. The learned are the heirs of the prophets. The prophets have not bequeathed money, but have only left sacred knowledge. And whoever takes it has taken an enormous share. So the sacred knowledge is what the scholars learn. And this puts them well above the province of normal people. So it says here, and I've shown you, this world and what is in it are accursed, except for someone with sacred knowledge or someone learning it. There's constant references to the Gnosticism within Islam. Studying sacred knowledge is a prayer. So learning the sacred knowledge is a form of worship. And there is nothing after what is obligatory that is superior to seeking sacred knowledge. So there's nothing superior to seeking sacred knowledge. So the sacred knowledge is the highest calling within Islam, to know the sacred knowledge, the gnosis. And it's just Gnosticism repackaged, well hidden, but repackaged. And then sacred knowledge. Sacred knowledge is better than devoting your time to fasting or prayer, better than saying Subhanallah or any other devotions. So the scholars have the sacred knowledge, and therefore they are placed in a category above the lay Muslim once more. And that's from Nawawi, the Sheikh al-Islam Nawawi. Now, within Islamic law, you've got a chapter within the Reliance of the Traveler and the Umdat al-Salik. You have there the chapter called the Quranic Evidence for Following Scholars. And you've got here, so Muslims are instructed in Quran 16:43, ask those who recall if you know not. If you don't have the knowledge, ask those who have the knowledge. Have you ever heard the saying, have you consulted a scholar? Have you asked a scholar? Harry, have you ever heard that question? Have you asked a scholar, when Muslims will say that to you?
Actually, I didn't have that kind of discussion with Muslims, so I didn't hear that. But I trust
Okay,
you.
well, okay, no, it's something that happens a lot. They'll say, have you asked a scholar? Culturalists derived from this Quranic verse, right? They should ask a scholar who will tell them. So by consensus of all scholars, the ijma is the main authority within Islam. The ijma is the consensus of the scholars, right? The consensus is clear. Ask Al Gore about that. But understand the concept of this consensus in the science is taken from Islam. Again, this is an Islamic, as far as I can tell, an Islamic way of thinking that has now infected the Western world. So the ijma is the major form of authority within Islam, right? It's the consensus of the scholars. And it says here, by the consensus of all the scholars, this verse is an imperative for someone who does not know a ruling in sacred law or the evidence for it to follow someone who does. To follow someone who knows is called taqlid. Right? It's the doctrine of taqlid, following. So you follow a scholar who knows, and he will guide you. He will tell you what to think, right? So virtually all scholars of fundamentals of Islamic law have made this verse their principal evidence that it is obligatory for the ordinary person to follow the scholar who is a mujtahid. This is someone who is qualified to make legal judgments, mujtahid, right? This is a well-trained scholar who's capable of making legal judgments. So understand, they've got to follow someone who knows, and there's different levels, as I mentioned in the past, and layers of knowledge. Any comments or questions before I go on?
I will check if there are questions in a second. I just want to understand. So a Muslim who is not imparted with this sacred knowledge doesn't have salvation?
Muslims are not guaranteed salvation whatsoever. Even Muhammad was not guaranteed salvation. Muhammad had no knowledge of whether or not he would have salvation. So yes, there is absolutely no knowledge of salvation to a Muslim. They can follow the rules, but they do not know. The only guarantee of salvation with Islam comes through jihad, to kill or to be killed in jihad. Now, of course, there's at least 14 kinds of jihad. One form of jihad is immigration. So when you migrate to a foreign land and you settle there to spread Islam, this is also considered jihad. It's not the highest form of jihad, but it is a form of jihad. And if you die in the act of jihad, like in the act of migrating, right? Or you die in the act of jihad, like you're killing or being killed for the sake of jihad, then this guarantees you access to paradise. That wipes away your sin, and it allows you to intercede for, I think, 72 of your family members. So this is the only jihad is the only guarantee of salvation. Otherwise, there is no guarantee of salvation in Islam. Does that answer your question?
Yes. If you don't mind, I think we have one question. Please make
Sure.
it quick and polite. Lagos, go ahead, please.
You in your statement you said you by your scholar you would be told what to think,
Yeah.
and that might be me misunderstanding, but what to think is a deeper thing than what than just being told. What to think implies you don't have a um, autonomy. You don't have your own thought. You're told what to think as opposed to what to say or believe, but what to think, which is a deeper thing. So I just wanted to clarify whether you meant the word in think, or that's all.
Okay. Yeah. Let me go to a section just to show you. Um. Okay. So I'm going to go to the section on sacred knowledge, page. I think it's page 4. So let me rather show you something that explains. As a follower, you don't have freedom of interpretation. You are supposed to know what you're supposed to believe and then follow it. Okay. So we have to look at this section here, which is the very first section, sacred knowledge. And it shows here the knowledge of good and bad and the meaning of good and bad. I'm going to go to that section now. Okay. So find that.
Am I still able to say? So
Yeah, sure.
it literally is about what to think. You're not allowed
Oh,
to.
there's a limit to what Muslims are allowed to think. Yes, they are supposed to follow because the secret recipe, the recipe of the right things to think, has been given to them, and therefore they must just the imams and the sheikhs and everyone have to simply make sure that the Muslims follow these things without question. Let me show you this. Actually, let me actually go through the section again because you may have missed the previous one where I went through this in detail. I covered that specific question in detail, but let me do it again. It says the mind is unable to know the rule
Sorry.
of Allah. Okay. So the mind is unable to know the rule of Allah about the acts of those morally responsible, except by the means of his messengers and inspired books. Okay. So who does the interpretation of these books? Well, the scholars. The lay Muslim is not allowed to do his own interpretation. Right. So it cannot be now, we'll see here. It cannot be said that an act which the mind deems good is therefore good in the eyes of Allah. Its performance called for and its doer rewarded. So, what your conscience tells you is good is not necessarily good in the eyes of Allah. Your conscience is wrong, and there's no guarantee whatsoever that you're required to do it and that you'll be rewarded, nor that whatever the mind feels to be bad is bad in the eyes of Allah, and its non performance called for and its doer punished by Allah. The basic premise, now this is within the Sharia, the basic premise of this school of thought is that the good of the acts of those morally responsible. Now, the morally responsible refers to a Muslim who is Baligh, who is 12 years old or greater, right? He's now an adult, is what the lawgiver, and notice that synonymous with Allah or Muhammad. So Muhammad is synonymous with Allah, which is the crime of shirk within Islam. The one thing that Allah does not forgive is to make a partner with Allah. But here within the Sharia, Muhammad is a partner with Allah. They are synonymous. They speak with the same authority, the same voice. And okay, is that and give well has indicated is good by permitting it.
Yeah, I find that
Or ask,
I, f-
yeah,
I find
sorry.
that really challenging. It's really challenging because um, surely we are all inspired by God, and so He would relish question
You're not allowed to do that. Islam does not. No, let me just finish up. Let me finish up here for a moment, and then we can tackle it again. So, the basic premise of this school of thought is that the good of the acts of those morally responsible is what the lawgiver, Allah or his messenger, has indicated is good by permitting it or asking it to be done. So Muslims have to follow the example of Muhammad, right? And the bad is what the lawgiver has indicated is bad by asking it not to be done. The good is not what reason considers good, nor the bad what reason considers bad. They reject reason here. They state, okay, good and bad, according to the Sharia, is the sacred law, not reason. So does that help to clarify?
One
So
second, I muted him because I wanted you to continue without interruption. Let me.
okay.
Yes, Lagos, go ahead again, please.
Thank you for that. Okay, but it's fundamentally challenging, because if God is in us, it's important that we have an input. The people that are chosen or selected, I don't know the wording that you want, to make the laws that you're not allowed to challenge, that for me, that that puts a human in between my relationship with God.
Yes. The Islam
But
works. Yeah.
no, yeah. So I think you're probably going to say, because you started with it, yes. So it's challenging, isn't it? Because it's like, hold on, my relationship with God is mine, and I am a sinner, and I've failed. I failed at the start, and I will fail probably all my life. I have to work through my life in recognizing the failure in myself and rectifying it and turning 180 degrees and just changing
Yeah.
how
Now,
it is.
before you, yeah, I understood. Now, Islam has a completely contrary concept to that. Islam is a very, very different concept. So the
Okay.
basic obligation of the Muslim is to simply follow the law in the Sharia, right? That is all that is required from the lay Muslim, which falls under, as I mentioned, the two divisions of Islam, the Ishara, right? Sorry, no, the two divisions, the Sharia and the Hakika. That falls in under the side called the Sharia, which the basic Muslim, lay Muslim, has to simply follow the rules, follow what he's told. The religious side of Islam is called the Hakika. This is the province of purely the elite, what they call the elect, right? The illuminated. Those are the higher levels of scholars. These are the Sufis, and they do these acts of religious worship on behalf of the rest. They do that on behalf of the rest. They carry that responsibility, and the lay Muslim just follows the rules because the lay Muslim sits at the bottom level of knowledge. Actually, you know what? Let me bring up a different set of slides. I want to show everyone this because it's gonna help if I actually just do this. So let me do this. It's going to be much easier if I can. Give me 1 second to just find this. It's going to help if I explain this once. And if you'd watched the previous episodes, it also would have made it easier because then you would understand. Um, Not this one. Let me close this. Just going to find the right slides. Yeah, because so I apologize for the interruption, but let me try and find the slide so I can just get this. I have covered this in previous episodes. If you'd watched them, it would have been clearer. But if I don't find this very quickly, then I'll rather just divert to something else. But uh, Okay, I'm not going to find it right now. So let me pause rather, let me just try and rather describe where I'm at. So Islam has levels. The lowest level is the Ibadah. This is the level allowed to basic Muslims, right? Well, lay Muslims. They're only allowed to know the Quran. They're not allowed to make their own interpretations. They're told by the levels above. The level above them is called the Ishara. This is where the Imams and so on find themselves. The level above that is reserved for the Sufi. These are the spiritual elite. These are the administrators. These are the administrated at the bottom. And then above that are the ones who are the spiritual elite. And the greatest of those achieve the fourth level. So there's this pyramid. And at the top, you've got this rarefied air of these scholars who know the spiritual knowledge. And this knowledge becomes more rare as you go to the top. And yeah, and so they have the greatest knowledge. So there's a very much a gatekeeping concept within Islam. This is how it is. The lay Muslims just merely to follow. So hopefully that answers that. I don't want to get diverted too much. I'll get back to, but hopefully that gives you some understanding. Anything else before I move on then?
Yes, I think Ouroboros, I can't pronounce it, wants to ask a question.
Ouroboros. Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, mate, if you have a question. Maybe later. Please continue.
Okay, now let's talk about those who know. Let's speak about the scholars, those who know within Islam, right? So you've got the ulama, right? Ulama, as we've mentioned before, we have discussed them before, and I'm going to do them again. So the ulama, singular, alim, ulama, plural. Pardon me. These are the scholars of almost all disciplines, although it's usually referred to the scholars of the religious sciences, right? In Sunni Islam, the ulama are regarded as the guardians, the transmitters, and the interpreters of religious knowledge. Again, this is coming from the Encyclopedia of Islam, right, which is a massive collaborative effort, which has spanned more than a century already. Okay, so these are the guardians, transmitters, and interpreters of religious knowledge and of Islamic doctrine and law, embracing those who fulfill religious functions in the community that require a certain level of expertise. So notice there are certain religious functions in the community that require a certain level of expertise in religious and judicial issues. There is no separation between the law and the religion, the judiciary, the politics, and the religion. They're one. Okay, it's a completely different concept to how we have within Western law, Western concept of law and politics, society, religion. Okay, now notice. So understand these people know some things and they do certain religious functions. I don't just mean like a priest manages the church. No, they have to worship in a certain fashion towards Allah, which is completely denied to the lower levels. They've got to administer that these people follow the rules, but the worship is done by this lot. And then because they do the worship on behalf of everyone else is like supposedly, given their whatever, everyone else is exempted from having to do that. But notice here, the alim is often seen as opposed to the adib, here of the profane knowledge. So now if you go into the realm of like the Freemasons and that kind of thing, okay, the profane are those who know nothing. They're either like a very, very low level initiate or they're an uninitiate. Typically, it's someone who's not initiated into the cult, right? The profane. So you have the initiated and the profane, and the lay Muslim is the profane, right? You are the profane. In fact, you're more profane. So understand there's this cult. This word profane has some interesting meaning for another time, but understand they don't use words like this accidentally. You have profane knowledge because you don't have the secret knowledge that they have. Okay, now they have a section here called the validity of following qualified scholarship. Let me go to that. Okay, the knowledge of good and bad. Okay, and notice science is ilm. So they have the alim, the faqih, the ulama. Okay, religion is synonymous with mysticism and mystics within Islamic law. A jurist, you can see here the ulama. Okay, this is a jurist, someone who makes law, studies law, determines rulings. A faqih denotes anyone possessing knowledge. Fiqh. The fiqh is the application of the sacred law, Islamic sacred law, the Sharia. So the fiqh, the faqih, applies the knowledge of the fiqh. Okay, synonymous with alim or ulama. Interesting. And then ulama, we've just covered this. Now, profane also means irreverence or contempt for God. So if you are so profane, It means you are irreverent towards God, but you're profane also means you're ignorant. Whereas they are not ignorant, they are wise. They know knowledge you don't. So therefore they worship God. You just shut your mouth, follow the rules. Here's the rules. Follow the Sharia, keep your mouth shut, do what you're told. Now the ulama, okay, plural of alim, okay, to know, again, to know, constantly, to know, to have the knowledge, to be aware of. Scholars of almost all disciplines. However, the term refers more specifically to the scholars of the religious sciences. Now here it comes up. Okay, these are the levels of knowledge within Islam. The lowest level is the ibadah. Okay, so ibadah in mysticism, again, not in religion, in mysticism, mystics, occultism, the literal language, which is suitable. Sorry, this is a typo here. This means suitable for exoteric topics, in contrast to the coded language of the ishara. Now, understand, exoteric means intended for or suitable for communication to the general public. The scholars term that the scholars of Islam term that following the Quran and the basic knowledge of the Sunnah that Muslims have is Islam for the masses. So the Islam that you learn and the Islam that the Muslims learn is Islam for the masses. Now you are denied certain knowledge that even your average Muslim has, right? Because you're not an initiate, you're the profane, you're not in the club. But even the lay Muslim is not really in the club. Okay, he just agrees to submit, and he's told by the scholar what to do, right? The scholar tells him. So he's given. So what he shared with him is the exoteric knowledge, what is suitable for him to know, which is the Quran and some of the Hadith. Now understand, if it's okay for him to know the Quran and the Hadith, that means they are garbage. That means they are irrelevancies. There's something to keep him busy, because this is if this is something that he's of a level to learn, it puts him at the absolute lowest level of knowledge, right? He's at the level of the ibadah. He's learning Islam for the masses, right? So therefore the Quran and whatever else he's allowed to learn is basic knowledge that is irrelevant, right? Now, ishara, the next level, gesture, sign, indication. These are allusions. These are subtleties, right? So that is the technical meaning of allusion. So in other words, reading between the lines, reading between the text. So allusion, to refer to, implied or indirect reference, from the Latin adludere, to play with words. Now understand, to play with words doesn't always have an honest connotation. In fact, it certainly implies a level of deception. Right? We've covered some of that in the past, but again, understand there's a level of deception here. In mysticism, it is the esoteric language of the inexpressible mystical experience. Again, it's not a rational experience. It's, I feel it, I feel the vibes. I feel the vibes. Oh God, I can't explain it. Understand, this is something that is not rational. It is irrational. Now, they will use lovely phrases like it is pre-rational, it is post-rational. In other words, it's just irrational. Okay? Symbolic expression, a silent gesture or a sign. Now understand, now we also get into the territory of your secret societies who use some symbolism, gestures, signs. Understand, again, all of this is part and parcel of Islam since the 7th century. Let's continue. Now you get to the latifa, the third level. In mysticism, the subtle organ, okay? The theory of levels developed in the time of blah, 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 and the mystics of his school. Now, what's very interesting is that they barely say anything about this. They skip over this third level by barely saying, so it's the subtle organ, okay? This is non-rational knowledge. This is what you learn at a non-rational level. Fine and well, but what's interesting is if you go to Latifa, okay, that's the Lataif, right? Plural, Lataif, it says here. This would be what we would be called synonymous, well, from a Western point of view, this would be the same as what we would call the Sophia. Okay, so that's the Greek word for knowledge, and Sophia is the goddess of knowledge or something like that. Very cool. I'm going to get that wrong if I think about it, but understand, Sophia, okay, Latifa. So the third level of knowledge. Now the fourth level of knowledge is supposedly reserved for the prophets. Right, those would be the prophets of the Bible, the prophets of the Quran, right? So those would be your King David, your Ezekiel and Jeremiah, the prophets, right? However, the Sufis are capable through their magical practices to achieve that level of knowledge and commune with Allah, and also, become like a prophet, the Sufi saints, right? So understand though that Sophia is a female, and the third level, the Lataif, right, the Latifa, which is equivalent to the Sophia, basically implies, without going into any depth here, because that's something I need to spend a lot of time disentangling at some point in my life, but this implies that, according to the scholars, Allah is female. Understand? So once you start digging into this, you start to discover that the scholars will say Allah is female. Right, now the fourth level, the haqaiq, the reality, the essence, the truth. Now in rhetoric and exegesis, it's the meaning of a word or expression, the basic meaning, okay, and it's distinguished from metaphor and analogy. So it is the ultimate meaning, the actual meaning, the true meaning of something. In philosophy, ontological meaning is the nature or an essential reality. So the fourth level is to achieve the essential reality of something. The logical meaning, al-haqiqa al-aqliya, is the truth, which is the exact conception of the thing established in the intelligence. The problem is you cannot reach it through rational thinking. You have to let go of rational thinking, and you have to go through these rituals, you have to say these incantations, and then you'll achieve this level. So in mysticism, the haqiqa is the profound reality to which only experience of union with Allah opens the way, right? And the al-haqiqa al-Muhammadiyya in the mystical thought, okay, is the universal rational principle, rational quote unquote, through which the divine knowledge is transmitted to all prophets and saints, also called the Ruh Muhammad. So the reality of Muhammad, the scholars will call this, the Islamic scholars, the major Islamic scholars write this term as the Muhammadan reality. So the substrate of reality is Muhammad. Muhammad is the essence of the creation. He's the essence of the world, right? Also called the Ruh Muhammad, the spirit of Muhammad. The Ruh in Islam is the Holy Spirit. So now you've got illusion. Sorry, yes?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't press the speak button when I was supposed to. But this actually goes into what I was going to ask, if that it helps.
Sure.
According to David Woods, the interpretations of Muhammad throughout the Hadiths and the Quran depict him as white. If this is true, is that the reason that images of Muhammad are prohibited?
That's somewhat off topic. So okay, so part of that goes back to the and there was even a major issue within the church at one time about symbolism, about imagery, right? I can't remember the name, just suddenly escapes me. It came into my flash into my head and disappeared. But there was a controversy at one time, even in the church, about symbolism, right? Religious imagery. But I don't think that's the reason that the imagery of Muhammad is forbidden. There must be another reason for that. But honestly, I wouldn't know enough to answer that question. I'm not sure if they're related or not. But the idea is that Satan is a black man. Within Islam, Satan is a black man. Okay? And Muhammad is therefore a white man because he can't be black. Right? Also, for instance,
he was actually described as white armpits, white shins.
Yes, white as white can be. So if he's the Holy Spirit, then he has to be, you see, because Muhammad is the bringer of light. Muhammad, you see, the worship of Muhammad, the worship of Islam by the scholars it's they call it light mysticism. You see, because they ultimately, see, the Ruh Muhammad is the spirit of Muhammad. Okay? And the true substance of the world is Muhammad. Muhammad is the substance. Muhammad made everything. Everything was made through Muhammad and for Muhammad. If you read through the Sirah, the Gospels of Muhammad, the biographies they call them, but they're his Gospels, Allah made the world through Muhammad and for Muhammad. Adam was created through Muhammad. Muhammad, his essence was pushed into the clay that made Adam. So the first man was made from Muhammad, and the holiness, the spirit within each of the prophets is the spirit of Muhammad, which Allah placed within each of the saints, including Jesus. That's what made them holy. They have a little fragment of Muhammad inside them. Does that help you?
Yes, it's less about me and more about the nonsense that's taking place up north, where the teacher was suspended. If there is a reason behind why Muslims are not permitted to see images of Muhammad, then wouldn't the solution be exposing what that reason was?
Yeah, I'd have to look into that one. I have to see exactly what their
Okay.
reasons
I
are
mean,
for.
David, I'll
But
say
if
that
you go
David
back to the
Wood's
15th, 16th century,
had
then there
some
were plenty
amazing,
of depictions of Muhammad. If you go back into the 15th,
yeah,
16th century, there's no shortage of depictions of Muhammad. So that's so this was a very late change, it seems,
yeah.
somewhere that they started to ban imagery. Um, yeah, I just wish David would speak about the Sharia and speak less about the Quran, because that's been done to death already. But understand, so hopefully this makes sense to you guys, that the ultimate reality within Islam, according to the Islamic scholars, the ultimate substrate of reality is Muhammad. Muhammad is the ultimate reality. And he transmits divine knowledge. So not the Holy Spirit, Muhammad transmits the divine knowledge. So for instance, when Jesus prayed and God filled him with the Holy Spirit, well, Jesus was filled with the spirit of Muhammad. Okay, so, and also the archaic is the term for secret philosophical doctrines. It's all secret. This is all secret knowledge. Again, just secret, secret, secret. It's everywhere. It's just, we really need to start digging into this. Okay, I'm simply
This what I'm
presenting. Yeah,
suggesting
sorry.
is, how would you expose such information in such a way that it would be of value?
Well, hopefully I'm doing so now. I'm trying to explain a lot of this stuff. I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of videos on my channel. I've got well over 100 videos on my channel discussing this, shorter and longer videos, digging into specific things, showing. I provide the resources, I provide the books, the references. The Quran, please just ignore the Quran, pretend it doesn't exist. Ignore the Hadith, ignore the tafsirs. You need to go into the Sharia manuals.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mysticism. Let's see. What is mysticism? So it's the experience of mystical union or direct communion with ultimate reality. Right. So basically, when these people commune, they commune with the spirit of Muhammad, and the spirit of Muhammad connects them to God directly. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So he's not just the earthly messenger of Allah, he's actually the Holy Spirit that connects you directly with Allah. The belief that the direct knowledge of Allah or ultimate reality can be attained through subjective experience. So this is the Merriam-Webster. So notice they don't say rational experience, they're saying subjective experience. That's very, very subjective. So knowledge of Allah, spiritual truth, or ultimate reality is attained through subjective experience, which cannot be described rationally, as I said, post-rational, pre-rational, and a vague speculation, a belief without sound basis. And that's definitely where we're at. Let's continue with some more concepts of occultism within Islam. Okay. The idea of word magic within Islam. Again, further issues within Islam that is simply not discussed, but is very important. Now, there's been for a long time this discussion about the ahruf and the qira'at within Islam. So the ahruf, they'll say, is a reading. So there's like 7 different ahruf, or 10 different ahruf, or 14 different ahruf. It depends on the day or who you talk to, which are readings or interpretations or versions of the Quran. Right? And they'll tell you, well, no one knows what it means because there's 50 different definitions, which is bullshit. Because there's only a handful of definitions. Now, every Arabic word has at least 3 meanings, right? That's common. However, these meanings are very specific within Islamic law. Now, ahruf, huruf or ahruf, okay, in the plural, letter of the alphabet or word. So that is correct. It does mean that. It does mean letter of the alphabet. It does mean word. It also means a Quranic reading or dialect. So those are 4 meanings we have now for this ahruf, right? But however, let's look at the major meaning. So those are minor, but there's a list of you'll see, but there's about 14 different meanings for this ahruf if you go into the notes, right? However, what is the major meaning, the most important meaning, the deepest, lengthiest, most substantive meaning? Well, let's go to the science of the huruf, the science of the ahruf. It is known as onomatomancy, a magical practice based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and of the divine and angelic names which they form. So when Muslims discuss the ahruf, the reason they say, well, there's like 5 billion meanings and nobody knows, it's because they don't want you to look at the obvious. Go to the book, check the definition, and it says, oh yeah, this is what it means. Muslims don't want you to do that because they know that once people start to pry into this and dig into this and start to make this public, Islam falls apart. It is exposed to the light. So the ahruf So what happens is the Quran, on the one level, on the bottom level, that ibara is read literally, and that's the level for the plebs, and you are below the level of a pleb, right? That's the literal meaning. Then you've got the next meaning, the ishara, right? The illusion, the allusions, the the little subtle meanings, the hidden meanings in the text. And then the third level is like where you see with not your rational mind, you see with the irrational mind. You can see things, that are within the text that you can now pry, secret knowledge you can pry out. And then, of course, it tells us that, well, when you read the Quran correctly, you have to read it using ritual magic, using this practice called onomatomancy, and you utilize the letters of the Quran and you do the recitations and so on to do magic, right? So huruf, let's have a look here. The science of letters, right, is a branch which is onomatomancy. So notice it says here very bluntly, this ahruf thing is the science of letters, right? Okay. Onomatomancy is a magical practice, which gives it the name of simia. So hold on. Simia is hypnotism. I don't have it in my notes, fine, but it's hypnotism. It's at least one of its meanings of simia is hypnotism, right? Which So basically, it's self-hypnosis to bring yourself into an occult state so you can pierce the veils, the 99 veils, by saying the names of Allah and saying the Quran in a certain way, and then you will enter into communion with Allah, blah, blah, blah. It's based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and of the divine and angelic names which they form. And there are three basic elements: arithmomancy, gematria, which in Islam is called the Hisab al-Jummal, okay, and also alchemy. Alchemy is a big thing. Now, if you go through, again, you read through, like the history of groups like the Freemasons and groups like that, they're all big on alchemy. But when you go into Islam, you start learning about alchemy, the connections are incredible. So now let's look. So each of the 7 groups are the fire letters, the air letters, the water letters, and the earth letters. So Islam actually does magic. Okay, and the letters of the Quran are fire letters, air letters, water letters, and earth letters. And then, of course, there are lunar and solar letters as well within the Quran. So the Quran at the higher levels, not at the basic level of the lay Muslim, not at the Ibara, but at the Ishara, the Lataif level, and the higher levels, the Haqaiq, it becomes an occult manual with secret coding, secret magical coding within it. So yeah, I'll pause there. Does that make sense? Any questions or comments?
We have a question.
Sure.
Ian, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you. First time I've been here, so I just sort of come on by accident, and you got my interest going. I just wondered, you mentioned religious symbolism. I wondered if you could clear something up for me. It's my belief through reading that David's son Solomon adopted what we know as the Star of David. However, that Star of David is actually an occultic symbol with the worship of Saturn. And that all stems into the reason I thought that is because it all stems into cube worship. And obviously, in the middle of Mecca, you have the big back cube, and they wear them on their heads, and we have these cubes all around the world. My question, I suppose, is it not the case that all religions stem from the same occultism from the adoption of that Star of David by Solomon?
Look, to be honest, I don't know enough about Solomon to discuss it, to discuss the issue. But I think you could say that all products on Earth are made of air and water, and therefore they're all the same. Your car is exactly the same as a banana. It's when you start to conflate things, because they seem that I would think that would be very wrong, because these are all based on ideas, and how they express themselves and how they found themselves are often very, very different. Certainly, there are certain things which are similar, but then there are also things that are different.
That Islam has, the levels of Islam. I mean, you mentioned the Freemasons, and I mean, if you look at all religions in the world, Catholicism, Christianity, Freemasons, Mormons, Islam, they all seem to have these levels. And obviously, the levels for us plebs is the Quran, the Bible, the Torah.
Well, look, I mean, like the Freemasons use floor tiles, and shopping centers use floor tiles. So shopping centers are obviously centers of Freemasonry and occult mystical temples of worship, because they all have floor tiles, right? You could say that Hitler drank water, I drank water, so therefore I'm Hitler. I mean, you're starting to conflate things, because your perspective, obviously you come from perspective already by implication, when you're saying, well, Catholicism is not Christianity. right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So which means already you have a distinct bias already in a particular direction. So you are providing, well, you are already exposing that you have a particular agenda. You've got a particular perspective that you want to either meet, that you want to pursue. So that's more of a statement than a question. That was more of a loaded discussion than an actual question.
It wasn't supposed to be a loaded question.
There are distinct differences between these things. Now, look, certainly within Christianity, you can talk about their sort of levels of understanding, certainly, but not that I know very much about it. But it's not something that is common practice. It's not something that is, something done by the elite, which is hidden from everyone else. And whereas in Islam, there's a very distinct difference with what they do. What they do is very much occultic. Judaism, I don't know much about the. I mean, you've got the Peshat, which is in Judaism as well, and but that again that is not a secret.
Church occultic?
No.
Have you seen the Catholic prayer room that looks like a snake?
Look, if you're talking about the current Pope, I don't think the current Pope's a Catholic, to be quite blunt.
Well, no, he's a Jesuit, isn't he?
Yeah, well, this thing is, you can say that, look, the Jesuits, there's certainly issues within the Catholic Church, I would say, but then again, if you want to go into the Protestant churches, you might not like what you find there either. You're going to find some serious problems, okay? And this is not, now remember, violations of doctrine are not examples of doctrine. These are violations of doctrine. Whereas within Islam, going on a bridge and stabbing someone through the eye with a knife, that is 100% perfectly correct, holy application of Islam.
Does it have to be a certain eye?
No, I'm just utilizing I'm just using a figure of speech. Okay. Whereas that, if a Christian did it, that is not a Christian act. That is a violation of doctrine. That would be a sin and a crime. In Islam, that is perfect Islam. That is being a good Muslim, because it does not violate the laws of Islam. It is an application of the laws of Islam. So you need to learn the difference between what is an application of doctrine and what is a violation of doctrine. Violations of doctrine do not show that this is what it is. These are violations. So obviously there's something gone wrong.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, those are some good questions, and I will try and tackle those in the future. I need to get into some of that, and I have notes on some of that. But yeah, at the moment, I'm not an expert on the occult, but I do want to start showing the occult connections within Islam. And we will start showing more and more the connections to Islam and the Freemasons, Islam and other occult groups, because this stuff gets really, really interesting. Okay. So, but that's just a little overview on the, I did mention this before, and this is something I'll be working on and I'll be doing in the future, but who's heard of a guy called Baron von Sebottendorf? Has anyone heard this guy's name?
Yeah, I think he was the head of the occult movement in Germany.
In Germany in 19 years. So the Thule Society.
The Thule, yeah.
Okay, so short version. Baron von Sebottendorf, not his real name, but anyway, blah, blah, blah. He goes to Turkey, right? So for whatever reason, he gets adopted into wealthy German families, royalty. So that's where he gets the name, the title. Goes to Turkey. Now, when you read through his biographies, they'll tell you he met a Jewish family. Shit. He met a Muslim family. The reason they say Jews is because obviously Islam shall always be, Islam must never be besmirched. Okay, so he meets a group that had 300, 400 years ago been Jews, but they'd converted to Islam. They were Frankists, right? So they converted to Islam hundreds of years ago. They were Sufis. So he met Bektashi Sufis. So they're Muslims. They're 100% Muslim. They're not Jews. They might have been Jewish hundreds of years ago, whatever. They don't met Jews in Turkey. And he learns Sufi Islam. He then goes back to Germany, founds the Thule Society. I think it's 1917. In 1919 or 1918, a man called Adolf Hitler joins the Thule Society, which at that time had then become the German Workers' Party, which then became the Nazi Party, which then proceeded to take over Germany. Now, the ideas, the concepts within Islam that had been utilized, the Bektashi Sufi ideas, which had founded the Thule Society, then some of those ideas were very much active and present within, well, let me just leave it at this. There's a direct connection from Sufism, the teachings of the Sufis, to Baron von Zobottendorf, to the Thule Society, to the Nazi Party and Hitler. There's a direct line. These ideas, many of them, like the Übermensch, if you look at Sufism, you can go through what they call the Insan al-Kamil, the Qutb. These are different names for the same thing. The perfect man, the most complete man, right? The man above other men, the perfect man, the complete man, right? The fully completed man, the Übermensch, right? This idea within Germany at the time, under Hitler and the Nazis, is very much in line with these concepts provided by Sufism, by Islam, right? The concepts of the completed man based on the occult Gnosticism. And there was a heavy occult influence within the Nazi Party. And you should go into the connections again with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, okay, Imam Hajj Amin al-Husseini. So there were very, very tight Islamic connections with Hitler that really need to be explored. And everyone loves to blame the Jews, but really we need to start looking at what's going on in Islam as well. So anyway, let's have a look at some of these examples of where Islam has now copied from the Gnostic texts some of these concepts, right, and that they use against Christianity. So the first apocalypse of James. Some Gnostic texts say that Jesus taught that the world was a prison created by an evil God. Okay, and the world is guarded by evil archons who require a secret password to enter the heavens. Now, James has secret passwords to ascend to the highest heaven out of 72 heavens. What is very unusual is that in Islam, when you go to heaven, you get 72 virgins. Just an oddity, just that little connection, a little bit of an oddity. Now let's look at Quran 41:12. He assigned to each heaven its duty and command, and we adorned the lower heaven with lights and provided it with a god. Okay, so something that has a parallel to what the Gnostic teachings are. Now, you've got in 1 Timothy 6, Paul warns Timothy about Gnosticism when he says, "O Timothy, guard what is committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, the gnosis. By professing it, some have strayed concerning the faith." So already within the New Testament, you see a huge amount of writings from Paul, especially Paul, against the Gnostics, because the Gnostics had already started to rise then in reaction to Christian teaching. Okay, the pagans were very much responding to what was being taught by the apostles. And he says here now, in a different interpretation, in a different biblical interpretation, it says here, "O Timothy, keep what is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called." And again, note here with Islam, which calls everything a science. Everything in Islam is a science. So oppositions of science, falsely so called. Rhetoric is not a science. Religion is not a science, but Islam calls them all sciences. They've got dozens of sciences. So, which some have professed and erred concerning the faith. So again, already there were warnings from within the early apostolic writings against Gnosticism. Right? Now, a general tendency was to be observed among practitioners of the religious sciences to consider a certain knowledge only. Now again, back to the Encyclopedia of Islam, and what are the Islamic scholars, the best Islamic scholars, what do they have to say? Well, it says here that, okay, to be observed among practitioners of the religious sciences who consider as certain knowledge only what is inherited from Muhammad. Now, Muhammad, as we know, was not a scientist. Muhammad didn't bring us anything. I mean, Muhammad's the guy that taught us that if a fly falls in your drink, in your coffee or your tea or whatever, right, you have to take the fly and dip its other wing. If it's one wing goes into the drink, dip the other wing, because the one wing of a fly has the disease and the other wing of the fly has the cure. So make sure you submerge the damn fly, because that way you save yourself from the disease that the fly was carrying. That's Islamic science for you. So, but understand, they teach and they believe that what is certain knowledge is only that which is inherited from the Prophet. Everything else is secondary. Right, let's have a look. Now, according to, again, Ibn Taymiyyah, he was the very first of what is called the Sheikh al-Islam. These are the major scholars of Islam. So again, you have Muhammad, then you have the major scholar of Islam, Al-Ghazali. Then you have the four scholars who founded the schools of jurisprudence, right, which we discussed earlier. And then you have 27 or 28 scholars, the list varies, who are considered the Sheikh al-Islam, the major scholars, the most influential scholars of Islam, after the four founders of the schools of jurisprudence. And the first of those on the list is Ibn Taymiyyah. So that's him here. And he says the science par excellence is that which derives from the Prophet. All other science is either useless or does not deserve to be called science. So all other knowledge in Islam is useless if it's not in the Quran, basically, or in the Sunnah of Muhammad, right? And it says here there are numerous prophetic traditions on the study of science which concern only religious knowledge. So understand, religious textbooks do not hold science, but in Islam, this is very much their mindset. What is true knowledge is what is religious, what came out of the Quran and the example of Muhammad, and that test tube stuff, not so important. Okay, any comment before I move on?
No, I don't see any questions.
Okay, now back to the ulama, the scholars who run Islam. This is like the committee, right? This is like the secret committee that runs Islam. The ulama have long been seen as a very distinct group, a regulated and structured body expressing the popular voice, speaking on behalf of the Muslims. Now, if you go back into some of the earlier writings within the Sharia, it states that they speak on behalf of the community, constituting the solid framework of permanent government behind the changing dynasties. So there has been a permanent government, which is the Islamic religious authorities have been a solid framework of permanent government behind changing dynasties. What they refer to here within the Encyclopedia of Islam is effectively a deep state, that there's a religious deep state that has been running for centuries.
How are they being elected into the ulama?
They're not elected, they study and they achieve certain levels of knowledge. They have to study, they have to go to the seminary, they have to achieve a certain level of knowledge, they have to adhere to the rules very strictly, they have to learn the Sharia, they have to learn the Hakika, and then they can become. So first you go to the second level, the Ishara, and you like administrate and rule over, and then you might be invited, you might study your way into higher levels and you initiate. Then you become a Sufi, you become an initiate, and you enter into the Sufi orders and you can work your way up. There's 9 levels of Sufism. Yeah.
Who is the Pope in Sufism?
In what?
Like, who is the bad guy? The Pope, the equivalent of a Pope in Sufism.
There's a guy that there's the highest level. Good grief. I haven't studied this well enough to know offhand. I need to look. I'm kind of presenting stuff that needs to be examined further rather than stuff that I know necessarily. I'm trying to collect all this information, but at the highest level of Islam, of Sufism, there's going to be someone called I think it's also called the Qutb. So there will be, once you achieve a certain level, you join this group that is you become a Sufi saint. You join a certain level. So and then you have a group under you that you lead, but there's like a very tiny clique, and they seem to run everything.
And are there any records when they meet together, or are they doing that in closed rooms? Like,
I have no idea. That's the thing. This stuff needs to be investigated further because clearly this is the structure of Islam. This is how they operate, and it operates like the Bilderberg group. It operates like the Freemasons. There's no real difference once you start looking into them. And
I understand.
you got to ask yourself, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
So we've discussed ghaib before. Yeah, go on.
1 second. I think we have another question from Ian and Lagos. Can we take them?
Sure.
Okay. Ian. No, sorry. Wait a second, Ian. Lagos, please go first. You waited longer. Make it quick, please.
I think you're beautiful in your analysis and knowledge. I fully respect your take on things. A lot of what you're saying is you keep using the word doctrine and everything else, which is a human given word, and I get challenged because I understand that every soul on this planet has a direct connection with God, and it's only about education. It's not
Agreed.
about.
Now, if you'd watched the previous episode, we discussed that in Christianity, in Western belief, certainly from a Western religious point of view, we do have a direct relationship with our Creator because we're made in the image of God, and through belief you can have that connection. Whereas when you look at what the Gnostics believe and what Muslims believe, there is no connection because Allah, God, whatever, is distant, he's remote. In fact, in Islam, God does not come to earth. He cannot come to earth. He's all powerful, but somehow can't come to earth. So much for being all powerful. But, that's kind of weak rather. But so there's a separation, and you are trapped in this evil earth because God is totally pure and he cannot come to earth, which is sin and evil, and matter is evil and matter is cursed. So therefore there's a disconnect, and only through the works, right, through works and through sacred knowledge can you leave the prison, this your prison of your body, and have this little piece of your soul escape the prison of earth and then travel into the realms and then go join itself again. That's their story. So this is what they're pushing, right? This is their story. So I'm trying to contrast these and show these are different worldviews.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying and I respect that. What I'm saying is we all need to know that he is omnipotent. He's everywhere. So everyone has a direct connection. And actually, whoever or whatever doctrine is telling you to do whatever you need to do, that's just horse. You need to connect with the God.
Thank you,
God.
Lagos.
Everyone's God, and that's my point.
Thank you.
To say that everyone is God is very much a Gnostic point of view, because
not everyone's God. Everyone's got a connection.
Oh yes, no, everyone's got one. Sorry, must my misunderstanding. Yes,
and we are all sinners, and we are all what's the word? We're all sinners. We've all made
agreed.
mistakes.
So within the Christian viewpoint, we are sinful, right? We're imperfect. But within the Gnostic point of view, there is no original sin, right? You are saved from ignorance, right? Because knowledge saves you from ignorance, and ignorance is what joins you again. Whereas this is very, very different. It's a very, very different concept. So it's based on arrogance, if you want to think of it that way. It's based on mythology, based on arrogance. Within Islam as well, Islam comes to save man from the Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah is the time of ignorance, the time of barbarism, the time of lack of knowledge prior to the coming of Muhammad. It's the state that man was in before Muhammad came to bring the knowledge, like the knowledge of drinking camel urine. Like, yeah, we really needed that, Muhammad. Thanks for bringing that crap along. So, dip the fly in the drink because, I don't dip my flies personally. I throw out the coffee, I make a new cup. So yeah, I'm not sure what Muhammad brought that was worth knowing. Like dipping 6-year-olds, maybe not. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that either. So understand, but there's a very big difference. So I'm just trying to contrast these differences. But look, thanks for that. I mean, certainly, I would say yes, they're very wrong. And obviously, if I had to choose which world to live in, I'm going to go with the Christian worldview, right? And that's a far more moral one. So what was the next question?
And I appreciate and hear your take on this, and it's beautiful. Actually, you're doing a fantastic job, and your knowledge is awesome.
Thank you very much.
Beyond me, and thank you.
Thank you, Lagos. Ian, if you have a question, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, the levels in Islam are kind of reminding me of the path of illumination that the Gnostics would have believed. They believed that knowledge would enlighten us. So if ignorance is the sin, then knowledge is the cure, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
But that knowledge is reserved only for the elite. So there
is a point where we can all obtain that knowledge, though.
According to Islam, no.
The histories of the religion.
No, that is not the case. Let me have a look here. No.
So that wasn't a statement. That was more of a question. So thank you for answering.
Sorry.
So, are you saying that some Muslims are limited from having access to the study of this sacred knowledge? Are
yes.
they are going to be refused?
Yes. because see here, okay. So okay, let me go into this. For instance, let me briefly allude to that. So thanks for bringing up that comment here. So what you've got here is this is a section called the perfection of faith. Okay, and then I'm going to bring up something else. This is called the perfection of faith within Islam, called ihsan, right? So to perfect your faith in Islam, it says here, so point number one, the perfection of faith is to adore Allah as if you see him, and if you see him not, he nevertheless sees you. Now remember, Allah threatens those who don't follow his rules, right? So that is the perfection of faith, to see Allah. That's step one. What are steps 2 and 3? Let's have a look here.
But how
So
can
they
what
said,
do you mean?
yeah.
What do you mean when you say to see him? You said that he has no form. It's just a pure will. So how can you see him?
Harry, you're going to confuse people with the facts.
I think I confused myself now.
Don't confuse people with the facts, Harry. Please don't. Okay,
Okay.
it's very annoying. Okay, so basically, okay, so belief in Islam. To step back a little bit and go into a separate topic, but belief in Islam requires you to believe in the Quran. Okay, you have to believe in Muhammad. Right? We've covered that. How you have to love Muhammad more than your family, more than your wife, more than your children, more than your mother, more than your father, more than your possessions, more than your own life. You're required to love Muhammad above and beyond anything and everything in your existence, including your own life. Right? So nothing in your life must be more important to you than Muhammad. This is a requirement upon all Muslims. Okay, we showed that on the last show. We discussed that. So this is a requirement. So you have to know, but you also have to believe in Allah. Now, as a secondary requirement, to know Muhammad, because Muhammad barely appears in the Quran, he appears in the Sunnah, the Hadiths, and all the other texts, right? You have to believe in those Sahih Hadith, in those what they call the authentic Hadith, as if you were a witness to them. You have to believe in them, even though you weren't there, even though you haven't seen the evidence, even though it happened hundreds and thousands of years ago. You have to believe in it as if you were a witness to them. So that's what they mean by belief. Understand? You're required to believe in that way. And remember, we did show again that you're to believe without evidence. You might recall in the previous episode we discussed where Islam requires belief without evidence. Now, maybe I can go back to that section and repeat that and show people where Islam requires you to believe utterly without evidence. Okay? That is one of your requirements. But let's look at one of the first requirements of how to perfect your faith. Just to get back to the question I was asked. So your first step, you must worship in a way that fulfills the obligations of Islam by observing all its conditions and its integrals, like the 5 daily prayers, for instance, right? Or never taking a pee while standing, because that's illegal in Islam. You have to sit down. Okay, you have to step into the toilet with your left foot. You have to step out with the right foot, and you have to say a prayer as you go in. You're going to say a prayer as you come out. All that nonsense. You got to do all those things. That's the basic things Muslims must do. But these are the obligations upon your lay Muslim. Okay, you're mukallid, right? So everyone's a mukallaf. Everyone's a mukallaf, which means that you are subject to the laws of Allah. You're supposed to listen to him and obey him and do what he says. Right. When you decide to follow an imam, when you ask one who knows because you know not, you then follow an imam and you agree to follow him and let him guide you. Okay, you then establish a connection, which then goes all the way to Allah, right? This is called taqlid, and you become a mukallid. So you have now agreed to follow an imam, right? So now for those who are at the higher levels, on the higher levels of Gnostic knowledge, right? It says here, so we have to worship in a way that fulfills the obligations of Islam, fine and well. But for the higher levels, do this while immersed in the sea of Gnostic inspiration. Again, why is Islam saying that you're a Gnostic and you're doing Gnosticism and the scholars are Gnostics? So you have to believe and follow all of the obligations of Islam while immersed in the sea of Gnostic inspiration, until it is as if the worshipper actually beholds Allah, has communion with Allah, this being the station of contemplative spiritual vision. Third, okay, you must worship as mentioned above, though aware that Allah sees one, this being the station of vigilance. Okay, sweet and well. Now it says here that all of these are of the perfection of faith, ihsan. But the perfection of faith required for the validity of worship is only the first. So in other words, if you only achieve the very basic level where you don't do any worship, you just follow the rules, shut your mouth, and do what you're told, as the Quran and as the Sharia tells you, that's awesome. Off you go, well done, pat on the head. While perfection in the latter senses, the last two, is the mark of the elect and not possible for many. Hopefully that clarifies that this is a province of the elite only. Does it help to clarify this, Harry?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to go to look at something. Now, this is the prime scholar. This is the preeminent scholar in Islam after Muhammad himself. This is the number one dude in Islam after Mo himself, okay? And we're going to look at something. Now, I have not read the whole book. I always just ignore it because it's just gobbledygook as far as I'm concerned. But I want you to have a look at this, okay? Take a moment, as the audience, take a moment and just read what is said here. Read what is written here, please. This is a discussion of the scholars, the top scholars, the most educated, the highest level scholars of Islam, and how they understand the world, how they understand the reality, and what they call themselves. Now, I didn't translate this, but this is what the main scholars of Islam call themselves.
They're a human, though, yeah.
Oh, they're human, yeah. They're for low values of humanity, most certainly. So those who stop short of complete illumination. Now, Islam, so the scholars, the Sufis, have a form of worship that is called a form of mysticism. Sorry, they follow a form of mysticism that they call light mysticism. The light mysticism is basically following in the footsteps of Muhammad, who was the bringer of the light. Okay, in Christianity, that would be Satan, who's the light bringer. But hey, but Muhammad, he is the light of the world. Muhammad is the light of paradise. Muhammad is the light of the sun. Muhammad is the light that lights up Allah's throne. Muhammad is the light that lights up. I showed all this last time. Okay, we went through all the sources that talk about that. So Muhammad is the light of the world. Okay, but notice he says here. You see, so they speak here. They speak of the Amr, the word of his command, the word of command, Allah's word of command, his power to create, to make things, right? And the explication of Amr and what it really is contains much that is obscure and too difficult for most minds. That's your mind. That's too difficult for you to know. You got to be an Islamic scholar, you got to have the sacred knowledge, right? So you don't have that. They do. You're just a pleb. And besides going beyond the scope of this book, and then Al-Ghazali says that the perfect Illuminati perceived that Al-Mutta, the obeyed one, is not more than the highest other than absolute deity and is related to him as the sun to essential light. So anyway, Muhammad is related to Allah the way the sun is related to light. See, the sun produces the light, and Muhammad is the source of Allah's light, or Muhammad is the whatever. It's all gobbledygook to me, but notice that he calls the Sufis the perfect Illuminati. He doesn't say the Jews are the perfect Illuminati. He doesn't say the Rothschilds, right? He doesn't claim whom he calls the Sufi the perfect Illuminati. His words, not mine. So make a note of that. Any comments before I go on?
1 hour 53 minutes. That's a very important key here. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, there's more, and there's more stuff like this. If you start looking around, you start finding stuff like this all over the place. We'll get into that as we go.
But
so anyway,
do they mean Illuminati in the way we understand it?
Do they mean Gnosticism in the way we understand it? Because it looks damn sight like Gnosticism the way we understand it. So yes.
Yes, right.
Once you start digging into this crap, yeah.
I would like to try to let Ian ask another question.
Sure.
Go ahead. Ian, you can talk.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that they mention Illuminati, and they do actually mention the Illuminati in the sense that I think we all know it of. I mean, they're obviously not talking about enlightenment. Like the Illuminati, they believe themselves to be enlightened because they have the secret knowledge. But the Illuminati actually it stems from Solomon, does it not?
Well, Solomon sinned. Don't forget, Solomon followed pagan ways. He started to follow pagan practices.
That's right. So the secrets, if you like, to the illumination, we have to look before Solomon to what they believed then.
Look, I
That's the
mean, it's
hidden
like,
teachings, isn't it?
to understand how a car works, we have to know how metal is mined in India. And to know how to drive a car, you have to know how petrol is synthesized in the forests of Borneo from the rubber tree that is eaten by the beaver. No, I mean, sure, whatever. But look, what it was, fine and well. But what it is today, what we can trace, this is a lot more relevant. Right, so we can all go, well, but we don't know what happened in 4,822 BC, so therefore we're on shaky
We
ground.
do
Well, look,
know,
we know what's happening now.
like the path of illumination and whatnot. We do know that the people like the Rothschilds who basically own the world's banking system, $500 trillion. We
Yeah,
do
I'm not
know
going
that
to go, dude.
they weren't
I'm
all
not going to go
they
down that
weren't
road
always
because I think
Rothschilds, were they?
that's
They changed their
look,
name.
dude. I'm not going to go down that road, okay? Because I think half of that is bogus nonsense myself, to be quite honest. But what I am showing is this is what the Islamic scholars, the top scholars of Islam, call themselves, the Illuminati. Make of that what you will. Okay, they follow light mysticism. They say that they are the illuminated. Allah is the illuminant. Muhammad is the substrate. That etc., etc. And they speak constantly of
Uh-huh.
illumination. They speak of light mysticism. It is the light, the light, the light, the light of illumination. We are the illuminated, the illuminant. We're the Illuminati. That's
We
all over
do
the
see
place.
that in every religion, though, don't we?
Every religion's the same. For instance, I mean, every religion, it's identical. There's not a single difference between every one of them. I mean, sure. I mean, men are women, women are men, humans are humans. We all have 4 legs, a head, and 2 arms, and like we're identical. No one looks any different to any other. They're all the same.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and Lloyd was here for 6 episodes already, and he demonstrated to us with evidence that Islam is completely different. He showed us the Sharia. This is not the same as other religions, even though the other religions can be problematic. But like he said, it can be distorted dogmas. And here
Yeah.
he shows us the dogma, and it's poisonful.
I do apologize. I missed those, and if it's possible that I can catch up on them, I certainly will.
You can find them on our pinned walls, all of them,
Okay.
in the groups.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
And on my channel, I've got some of these talks up on my channel. So look, excuse my sarcasm, but yeah, look, I mean, when you start digging into these, I don't buy into a lot of the conspiracy theory nonsense because I think a lot of that's bogus. But whatever, we can have that discussion another time. But this is what the Islamic scholars are writing. This is what they're calling themselves. This is what they say. And as you dig deeper into this, you start to see the connections, and you're going to start seeing the connections yourself. So let's go to the Quran. Quran 344. This is a part of the news of the ghaib, the unseen, the news of the past nations of which you have no knowledge. So Muhammad supposedly didn't have knowledge, but somehow Allah gave him knowledge of the past. Okay, not of the future, of the past. That's really interesting. I wonder what I did yesterday. Don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but let me tell you about what I did yesterday. I'm a prophet because I can tell you what happened yesterday. Wonder where I got that information. So anyway, so Muhammad's a prophet because he could talk about stuff that happened before. Smart guy. Incredible knowledge, how he knew about stuff that happened before. Maybe no one told him. Anyway, but notice they speak of the ghaib, the unseen. The Quran contains at least 15 references to this ghaib, the unseen. And the ghaib in the Quran, notice again, it is mysticism, gnosis, occult, mysticism, constantly, over and over. And these words are there constantly. And it's like, we need to start looking at them as a cult practice. And again, here we go. We've just seen this. And that's what that is now. Now, Ghazali's Mishkat al-Anwar, known as the niche for lights, the place where the light goes, right? Where the light enters, whatever, makes numerous direct Gnostic references. Again, it talks constantly about Gnosticism, right? Now, sorry, this is the slide I was trying to find earlier. This is for those at Lagos. So I was wanting to talk about this. Let me finish this Lagos and I'll come back to you. Islam is divided into 2 divisions and 4 levels, okay? Just like you would have within Gnosticism, these levels, okay? And you get this pyramid as you go to the top. And exactly like you would have within Freemasonry or any other of these secret societies, these secret mystery religions, you're going to have these pyramids. So Islam is divided into Sharia versus Hakika. The Sharia is the section where you obey Allah versus the Hakika, just knowing Allah, right? Because Allah's presence, his knowledge of his character and personality is not within the Quran. It's just laws. There's very little knowledge of the personality. Who is this God that we are dealing with? And this is where the scholars have had to now extrapolate and make up their own nonsense, okay, to determine who is Allah. And they've stolen a lot of that from the Talmud. They've stolen a lot of that from Jewish mythology and other religions. Now, in Islam, they speak of the zahir, the outer, the exoteric. Okay? So zahir is the outer, the exoteric, and this is what is allowed to lay Muslims and to you. You are even at a lower level. You're part of the profane. You're outside of the club, so there are things that cannot be shared. As I've shown before, knowledge of Islam, its books, is illegal for you to possess. It's illegal for me to do what I'm doing according to Islamic law. I'm sharing the secrets of Islam, the weaknesses of Islam. This is illegal. For a Muslim to do this would be treason. We're not allowed to possess Islamic texts according to Islamic law. Now, Zahir is the outer meaning or the outer practice, which is what lay Muslims do. It's the first level of meaning. In other words, it's also the first meaning that you perceive when reading something. Okay? It's the first meaning that you perceive when you read something. Whereas you've got the batin, the inner, the esoteric. The esoteric is secret, right? The secret meaning. So the inner, direct, personal knowledge, but this is subjective knowledge of Allah, subjective experience of Allah. This is when you read between the lines within these mystical states, right? Now, let's have a look here. The 4 levels, those are the 2 divisions. Now we have to look at the 4 levels of Islam. The ibadah is the literal level, okay? The zahir, the outer, right? The basic practices. Then you have the ishara, what is implied, what is not said, but what is implied. The lataif are the nuances, right? Which are beyond what the implication. These are secret things that you only know when you enter into that 3rd level, when you're initiated into that 3rd level. The 4th is the haqaiq, the reality, the truth, the divine essence, right? And this is the Muhammadan reality, the spirit of Muhammad, like the Holy Spirit, but the spirit of Muhammad. And the spirit of Muhammad is what transmits divine knowledge to the prophets and to the saints. And when in Islam they say saints, they mean the Sufis, the Sufi saints. So the secret knowledge that Jesus brought was given to him by Muhammad because he was filled with the Holy Spirit. So according to Islam, he was filled with Muhammad. The prophets after the Pentecost, etc., were filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, hey, they were filled with Muhammad. This is how Islam believes and treats this. Now, your lay Muslim is not going to know this, or if he does know it, he will lie about it, because again, as I've shown before, lying is not only legal in Islam, it is compulsory. It is obligatory upon Muslims. They're not allowed to reveal this. I'll pause here for a minute. Any questions?
No questions right now that I can see.
Okay. So, fine. Hopefully this is clear. Is that clear to you, Harry? Does this explain a lot?
It does. It's very important information.
So
The Gnostic source for all of that is, I think nobody speaks about it. In all my years of research, of course, nothing on the level of what you're doing, but I was very curious about it. I never heard any connection, almost no connection.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, so hopefully this clarifies and starts to show, and I'm taking my time through this, obviously, but hopefully this shows you what's plotting here. Okay, we've seen this already, and we've seen this, the perfection of faith. This you have seen. Okay, I've already covered this, right? And we've seen that the world is cursed. Okay, we've seen that. So yeah, and of course, don't forget. Oh, by the way, on this point, as I've said before. So Gnosticism, there's a very harsh dualism between the world of matter and the world of spirit. The world of spirit is perfect and pure. The world of matter is dirty, filthy, evil, right? And Islam has a harsh dualism as well between matter and spirit. The same that, because notice, Islam has a view that fitna is worse than murder in Quran 2:191. Fitna, in other words, temptation away from the faith so that you leave the spiritual part of Islam, is considered worse than murder. So for you to murder someone, let's say you go and proselytize in Saudi Arabia and someone stabs you in the throat and kills you, right? Well, what you were doing is worse than murder because you were causing fitna. You were causing temptation away from this path that is going to save their souls. And the guy killing you, well, that wasn't so bad because it's better than what you were doing for spreading your faith. So understand, so this actually matches Islam's view that fitna is worse than murder. And we've covered this. And I will pause here. I think I've gone on for a while, so I'll pause here tonight and I'll leave it here. But esoteric, let's have a look again at this word esoteric. So it's designed for, understood by the initiated alone, by the specially initiated alone. Okay, esoteric legal doctrine, as an example, that would be Islam. And it requires to be, for something to be esoteric, requires knowledge that is restricted to a small group, an elite. Again, your gatekeepers within Islam or a small circle. So yeah, I'll pause there. So any comments from you? Because I've gone for a couple of hours, and so any questions before I'll call it a night?
No, I think we are done, but I would like to ask if we are done with this topic, if you are willing to go for slavery in Islam next week.
And I'm not done with the topic. I still have a bunch of slides to do. I'm not done with this yet, but just for tonight. Just done for tonight.
Okay. But I think
let
it
me
will be very important to do slavery as well when you have the time, please.
Certainly. Look, now I'll do that. I did this recently for another group. But let me see how many slides I still have on this particular topic. Let me have a look here. Just give me a sec. So okay, so we still have a bunch to do. So no, I've still got. So look, next week we'll continue. I've got enough to keep me busy for a while, so we can do at least one more episode, if not two, discussing this. Would that be all right?
Of course.
Yeah. So hopefully that'll be fine. So I'll pause here for the night because my throat's sore. I've just come back from my trip and got a lot going on. But yeah, so I will stop sharing. Where do I stop sharing? I never know.
I will stop the recording. So thank you very much, Lloyd. Thank you as usual for this interesting lecture and very insightful information. It's a delight.
Yeah.
It's a very upsetting delight, but at least we have a chance to hear the things and to read from the source.
Yeah. So what have you learned from this? What have you taken away from this tonight? I mean, what has this added to your knowledge or made you think about?
1 second, Pickley wants to say something. Go ahead, Pickley.
Oh, no, I just think it's good to have him back.
Yeah, it's always good to have him.
Pickley.
Anyway.
So are you seeing the direct connections to Gnosticism and the occult beliefs? Because look, I'm going to start digging much deeper into the Islamic connections to the occult, to occult societies, to world politics like World War II, Nazi Germany, as well as the Freemasons. You're going to start to see, and above the Freemasons is another group above them that are a higher level of Freemason called the Shriners. And you're going to see the explicit Islamic connections to the Shriners, and you'll see then Islamic connections into the Freemasons as well.
Yeah, a few presidents were Shriners. I think Ford and the guy who threw the nuclear bombs. What's his name was? For sure,
Yeah.
I saw the hats on his head. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just I can briefly just do this. Let me go here quickly. Let me actually go here.
Yeah, Harry Hess Truman. Yeah, he was definitely a Shriner, and there was another president. His name Ford something.
Yeah, I'll run through this very briefly for everyone, just so you can see. But I've covered this before. Look, this is a shrine of Fez. I'm not going to go into detail. It says Muslim on it. I think that's pretty clear. It's got the Islamic sword and the star and crescent of Islam. But however, oddly enough, notice it's got an Egyptian face here. So this is also the cult of Isis. So understand these are Muslims because it says Islam. They've got the sword of Muhammad or the sword of Ali, depending who you ask. You've got the star, the crescent, but this is also the symbol of the cult of Isis, which is another Gnostic sect, oddly enough, right? So you got these are some oddities here, okay? So notice Muhammad, you've got all of this Isis, interesting. You got the cult of Isis right there, okay? And the cult of Isis, oddly enough, was not Egyptian, it was in Rome. It was the biggest competitor to Christianity in the 3rd century. So weirdly enough, so there's some odd things here you can talk about. And these guys talk about the York Rite, which goes from the entered apprentice of the Knights Templar, the significance of the Fez, the Freemasonry. I'll get into that next time. Oddly enough, here you go. The Islamic Shriners, that's a very Islamic symbol. The Quran he's holding over there, that's a white dude. Crypto Muslim. Everyone talks about crypto Jews. We need to start talking about crypto Muslims because there's actually a lot of evidence for crypto Islam in the States. Quran. Okay, now you're looking at these are white guys. I'm pretty sure they're Americans, and they're wearing all of these Islamic gear. And the Shriners are not Islamic at all. That's why they claim they come from the Caliph Ali, the son of Muhammad. Okay, that's why they say Alam Alaikum when they greet everyone, which is the Islamic, greeting. And then, of course, you've got Abu bin Adam, the Keg Patrol, the guy with his little car, and that's all funny, except there's a Shriner mosque. which is not a Jewish place of worship, the last I checked. And there's the mosque. And holy moly, actually, the mosque is named after this Abu bin Adam, is actually a Sufi. That is so weird, just a sheer coincidence. And then AAONMS, right, which is anagram of A Mason, the history of the ancient Arabic ordered nobles of the mystic shrine, A Mason. And the founders of the shrine of the Shriners were both Masons. They were both 33rd degree Masons because the guys who wrote the book are both 33rd degree Masons, and they founded the Mecca Temple. And notice here the sword of Islam. This is the black flag of Islam, the crossed swords. And this is, looks like a Freemason temple here. You've got a Freemason wearing a Shriner hat, and you've got the crossed swords, and you've got this, looks like you can see here the mosque, the minarets of the mosque. That's definitely not Islamic, especially when it's got the symbol here within a Freemason temple. Definitely nothing to do with Islam. And this is an Islamic symbolism, the sword of Islam, chopping off the head, which is part of Masonic imagery. The Islam temple, California, pilgrimage to Sacramento, these Shriners, all of them pushing the government out and taking over this is the seat of the government in California, 1915, right? Islam temple, so they call this the the Islam temple. You got to ask yourself questions, got to ask yourself. I mean, we've covered this before, 1925, and you start looking, these guys are Sufis. Notice here, this is the Sufi dancing, okay? That's the Sufi dancing, and you continue again here. Let's have another look. Sufi circle dancing.
Are they reaching a state of trance or something when they do that?
Yes, except there's Sufis and there's Sufis. Okay, so there's the distraction Sufis and there's the real Sufis, and the Sharia pisses on the bad guys constantly. It's not happy with them, but they're a nice distraction away from the real thing. But yes, they reach these trances by doing all this stupid crap. So I'll pause there. That's what I'm getting to in the future. So does that make any sense?
It does. It does. I think we have another question, but I think you're
Sure.
tired already.
Let's go. I'll take one more question. I've got to clean this room. My wife is going to kill me.
Oh, if you want to ask something.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Oh,
hi again. It's Ouroboros. I know you struggle with it, but it's Ouroboros. Yeah, what I was asking, or what I was thinking was, how are you going to get this kind of information into the rooms that matter? Because, like, I know you understand, you keep saying that other people are saying things that are like conspiracy theory, blah, blah, blah. That's all that, the MPs and the councillors are going to hear when these things are being said.
It's a tough thing. Look, for knowledge to become common knowledge, mainstream, it needs to be, you need like approximately 10% of the public to be aware of it. So you need to make sure that 10% of the people around you, it's typically 8 to 9, 10%. Okay, so let's say 10%. For anything that is common knowledge, 10% of a given group, population, whatever, knows it. So you need to make sure that 10% of the people around you, 8% of the people around you know this.
In that case, would you sort of, I don't know, go through some political party if they were to give you
Talk to your friends. If you're in a soccer club and there's 10 guys, 10% is at least one. Okay, so talk to 2 people, get them on board. In your chess club, there's 1 million people, talk to 10% of them. In your cooking club, your reading club, your whatever it is you do, you need to make sure that this is the best way to put it out there. I think that's the best, to make it common knowledge. That becomes a tidal wave of information.
Sure, I'm just concerned about whether or not that will reach the the people who make the decisions on what happens and what doesn't.
Public sentiment is a massive issue. Why do you think censorship is so important to them? Because public sentiment is a massively powerful force.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, guys. I want to let Lloyd go. Thank you very much again, and we will be seeing you next week.
You're welcome. Thanks. I hope that wasn't boring. I hope that was interesting. And yeah, guys, till next time, I'll continue with this, and you're going to start seeing all of these weird connections to. In fact, look, the Sufis claims explicitly to have founded the Freemasons. I mean, we'll just leave it at that.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you very much, and have a beautiful night.
Okay, take care, everyone. See you then next time. Bye.